This is going to be a pretty quick video that's going to touch on just one issue in this whole story, which is Jennifer's false accusation of sexual coercion toward me. And I want to be very clear that it is often the case that if people make false accusations of things, that it's hard to prove a negative, right? Like, you can prove something happened if you provide the evidence for it, but how do you prove that something didn't happen? And I've already mentioned in some of the recent writings, and it was heard on the audio of Sue Tremblay's recording, that Sue didn't really believe Jennifer's accusation because it was inconsistent with her earlier behavior. And I think that's a very good point to make and good for people to know, but that is, of course, circumstantial evidence. But this is actually one of those unusual cases where there is more than circumstantial evidence. There actually is pretty strong evidence that Jennifer's entire sexual coercion story is a lie, that it never happened. And I do believe that if their unethical lawyer hadn't managed to throw a monkey wrench into the workings of the legal system and we actually had been able to hash all this out in the court, it would have come across very clearly to both the judge and the jury that the story was a lie. And a big part of the reason for this is something that I understand and have understood about Jennifer for a very long time, including way back when we were dating, which is that she is amazingly dishonest in a lot of ways and willing to just spew complete lies in print, but she's actually a pretty bad liar in person. And if you actually look her in the face and ask her things, like, she is pretty much likely to wither under pressure and not be able to keep up her lies. And in particular, because she does have a legal career, she does seem to take the idea that she's not supposed to lie under oath seriously, because that is committing perjury if she does that, and she could potentially, lose her job as a lawyer if she committed perjury. So, knowing all this stuff about her, I feel like I really was able to handle these requests for admission in a way that really got to the heart of these issues early in the lawsuit. So the way requests for admission work, there's a limited number of them that each side is allowed to ask the other one heading into a court case in print. And the other side is required to answer these under oath. And they're supposed to be fact-based questions that have a clear admit or deny. The other side claims this is the fact, and do you admit or deny that? Just in terms of trying to establish some baseline facts about the case before deposition of witnesses and before actual court hearings happen and all that kind of stuff. So setting that kind of baseline down. And one of the request for admission that I submitted, I will read to you right here. It was my request number 12. In the September 9th, 2022 statement that you submitted to NASPA, you included a letter to Jason Idalski with two sentences highlighted. The first sentence is, quote, "Like so many women, I have been sexually assaulted in the past," unquote. This sentence does not refer to plaintiff. So I'm saying very clearly, it's a matter of fact that I want the other side to admit, and they have to answer under oath, that this particular sentence where Jennifer talked about being sexually assaulted in the past in her letter to Jason Idalski was not about me. It was about someone else entirely. Now, I want to be very, very clear. I submitted this knowing that she has to answer this under oath. If I knew that I had sexually assaulted her, if it was true, there's no way I would have submitted that question, because she would have just very easily said, deny, this is a true statement, it does refer to the plaintiff. And then if there had been any truth to the sexual coercion story, she could have answered that question that way and not be committing perjury, and it would have actually just produced legal evidence, sworn evidence of hers, that actually, reflected badly on me and could get me in some sort of legal trouble. And the only reason I submitted this question in the first place was because I knew that it was absolutely untrue, that there was no sexual assault from me toward her. And Jennifer's response in the written document was, response, objections form undefined terms. Notwithstanding the objections, reasonable inquiry has been made, and the information known or readily obtainable by defendant is insufficient to enable defendant to admit or deny without knowing the definition of the vague term, quote, refer, unquote. Okay, so Jennifer didn't say right away that this sentence does not refer to me. She argued about the definition, the dictionary definition of the word refer, right? Basically just throwing complete sand in the eyes, making these just silly objections about the meaning of common words. And I'm like, why in the world would she not want to answer that question? The only reason she could possibly not want to answer that question and make objections and try to throw sand in the eyes is because the true answer is that that sentence does not refer to the plaintiff. She was actually talking about someone else she was sexually assaulted by. And quite simply, there's no possible explanation for her behavior here in answering this question under oath, other than the fact that the sentence did not refer to me. There was no sexual assault from me, and Jennifer did not want to admit it, did not want to have to actually comply with answering that question under oath, wanted to try to find some way to weasel out of answering the question. But then, if that's the case, if there is no sexual assault from me to her, that means not only that she lied about this, but that she intentionally took a letter in which she was talking about someone completely different, not about me, and submitted it as false evidence to try to get people to get the wrong idea of this intentionally, to make the false inference that this letter was about me and get people to think worse about me. And this right there is defamation by insinuation. One of the things that I think is just insane and dumb on Jennifer's part throughout these Scrabble things, and even in the court case too, is she doesn't even seem to understand. She thinks that she can get away with committing defamation by not telling the lie outright, but by putting the lie in people's heads indirectly. And in fact, if this actually went to court, if we actually had reasonable hearings about this, what she might have very well learned is that that is defamation by insinuation, and that is something that people can be found guilty of defamation for. You don't have to say the lie explicitly to be guilty of defamation. If a reasonable reader is going to infer the lie, and you wrote it clearly with the intent to get them to infer that lie, then you are guilty of defamation. So quite simply, Jennifer lied about this. And also, let me remind you that Lola lied a ton in her stuff too, but even with her lies, she never accused me of any sexual misconduct. Quite simply, there was no sexual misconduct by me. All of the thoughts that people have in their heads, the reasons they might hate me as a result of this, are based on this one completely false and now proven false accusation. And what really disgusts me is not just that so many people feel that if an accusation like this is made against a person, that they're automatically guilty. They're automatically a bad person regardless of whether this thing gets disproven, because if you must have gotten accused of that thing, you must be a bad person. But what that should mean in my head is that if people are going to think badly of somebody for that, you need to also think badly of people who make false accusations of this kind of thing. Why isn't making a false accusation of some sort of sexual assault just as hateful a thing, just as horrible a thing as actually committing sexual assault? Telling that life-destroying lie is a massively bad thing, and it is something that our society should be judging just as heavily as it judges sexual assault. And I also want to be clear that what Jennifer did in this false accusation, and you could say more at large with what Jennifer and Evans and Lola did with this whole ream of accusations they made in their documents, is an example of an old KGB technique called the rotten fish. The rotten fish is the idea that you make really horrible accusations about a person, even though they're totally false and later going to get disproven, because they're like the stink of a rotten fish. Is that once those accusations are made about a person, the stench of them never washes off entirely. And people will continue to think about that person with those false accusations on them and make that mental connection. They might forget the details of it. They might forget the fact that this was completely disproven and completely false. But the fact that that accusation was ever made in the first place just forever puts a stink on that person's reputation. And there is some truth to that can be a successful technique. That's why the KGB did it. But that is what the Clinchys and Lola and Chris Lipe have done. They've resorted to literal KGB techniques to destroy the reputation of another person. That is how disgusting and horrible they are. I'm going to give links in the description and the text, not only of this request for admission and response, but also to another post I made on Facebook in which I actually explained in a little more detail this rational argument of why it shows that the entire sexual coercion claim was a complete lie, why I've proven that it is a lie.